How would you respond if an abuse of power threatened not only your dignity but the very fabric of justice itself? In this powerful story, FBI agent Marcus Blake encounters Officer Travis, a racist police officer who brazenly arrests him based on false assumptions. However, Travis and his network soon realize they've targeted the wrong man. Marcus fights back with undeniable evidence, exposing a deeply entrenched corruption ring led by Captain Hayes and orchestrated by a hidden figure known as the Broker. With the help of allies, his relentless determination, and the unwavering support of his family, Marcus dismantles the system that tried to silence him. This story isn't just about one man's fight. It's a reminder of the courage it takes to challenge injustice and bring the truth to light. Subscribe to Mr. Denzel Stories for more impactful narratives like this. Don't forget to like, comment, and share. The night was bone-chillingly cold, the frost creeping through thick clothing like an unrelenting force. Marcus Blake, a composed and meticulous FBI agent, stood at a deserted gas station. His sleek black SUV gleamed under the dim lights, reflecting the glow of the street lamps. The surrounding streets were silent, broken only by the occasional gust of wind and the hum of passing cars. Marcus was focused on sending off the last email of the day, his fingers tapping swiftly on his phone as he stood by the pump. The silence was shattered by the screech of tires. Two patrol cars sped into the gas station, their flashing red and blue lights casting streaks of color across the asphalt. Doors flung open, and 4 officers stormed out with guns drawn, their shouts piercing the stillness. "Hands up now!" one officer barked, his voice sharp with authority. Startled but composed, Marcus slowly raised his hands, his heart pounding but his demeanor calm. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice steady as he tried to assess the situation. The officers ignored his question. Officer Travis, whose demeanor radiated arrogance and hostility, quickly closed the distance. Without warning, he shoved Marcus against his SUV, twisting his arms behind his back with unnecessary force. The cold metal of handcuffs bit into Marcus's wrists. "I was just getting gas," Marcus said, his voice calm yet firm, despite the pain and indignity. "Shut up," Travis snapped, his eyes cold and piercing. Another officer began rifling through Marcus's pockets, ignoring his protests. They had no warrant but continued their search undeterred. When Travis reached into Marcus's inner jacket pocket, he pulled out a small leather case. Flipping it open, he found a gleaming FBI badge. For a moment, hesitation flickered across Travis's face, but it was quickly replaced by suspicion. "Fake badge," Travis sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. "You think this will fool anyone?" Around them, a small crowd had begun to form. People fueling their cars stopped to watch, and some quietly pulled out their phones to record the escalating scene. Marcus held his composure, his sharp eyes locked on Travis. "I am an FBI agent," he stated clearly, his tone unwavering. "You're making a serious mistake." Travis ignored him. Another officer stepped forward, yanking the handcuffs tighter, causing Marcus to wince in pain. It was becoming evident to Marcus that this wasn't a case of mistaken identity, but rather a deliberate display of power. Inside the police precinct, Marcus sat in a stark, cold interrogation room. The harsh neon light overhead cast an unforgiving glow on the sterile walls. His wrists throbbed, and his tailored suit was wrinkled and dusty from the patrol car's floor. He sat still, his composed exterior masking the storm of emotions roiling inside him. The door opened, and officers Travis and Jensen entered. Travis's expression was unyielding, his posture a display of dominance. Jensen, younger and less seasoned, followed with a smug glint in his eye. They carried an air of mockery, their demeanor charged with condescension. "Who do you think you are, walking around like you own the place?" Travis began, his tone laced with derision. Marcus met his gaze with unwavering calm. "I was just getting gas." Jensen tossed a file onto the table. The papers spilled out, revealing a grainy security camera photo of a black man in dark clothing leaving the scene of a robbery. "Is this you?" Jensen asked, his voice sharp with accusation. Marcus glanced at the photo and then back at Jensen. "That's not me." "Exactly the kind of excuse I expected," Travis sneered, circling Marcus like a predator. Placing a heavy hand on Marcus's shoulder, he pressed down hard. "We don't need your confession to put you away. You fit the description, a black man in a black SUV. That's enough." Marcus stared at the blank wall, his silence deliberate. He was determined not to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. Memories of past injustices flooded his mind. He recalled being stopped by police as a teenager, jogging through his own neighborhood, and being told he didn't belong. He remembered a friend who was wrongfully detained for simply driving a car that looked stolen. These were not isolated incidents but reflections of a deeply flawed system. "What are you thinking, Blake?" Travis snapped, his voice cutting through Marcus's thoughts. Marcus didn't answer, his sharp gaze unyielding. He thought of his wife, Emily, and their 2 young sons, Ethan and Caleb. How would he explain this to them? How could he tell his sons, who idolized him as a hero, that even as an FBI agent, he was not immune to the prejudices and systemic abuse that plagued their society? Returning home that evening, Marcus was greeted by the warm glow of the living room window. It should have brought comfort, but instead, it added a heavy weight to his chest. Inside, Emily and their 2 young sons, Ethan and Caleb, were safe, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around them. He paused at the door, taking a deep breath to compose himself, masking the turmoil swirling within. As Marcus stepped inside, shutting the door behind him, his phone buzzed in his pocket. Pulling it out, he stared at the screen. A message flashed before his eyes, freezing the blood in his veins. "Stop now if you don't want your family to pay the price." Attached to the message was a photo of his family, Emily and the boys, taken from a distance earlier that afternoon while he was still in custody. A chill ran down his spine, quickly replaced by a burning fury. Wasting no time, Marcus saved the number and forwarded it to Rachel with an urgent note. "I just received a threat, likely tied to Hayes or his network. Immediate investigation needed." Seconds later, his phone rang. Rachel's voice on the other end was grave, the weight of the situation unmistakable. "Marcus, this isn't just about you anymore. We need to place your family under emergency protection. I'll send a surveillance team to your house tonight." Marcus nodded instinctively, though Rachel couldn't see him. "Do it as fast as you can," he replied firmly. "I won't let them harm my family." After the call ended, Marcus sat at his desk, poring over old files. The documents painted a clear picture. This wasn't just a case of individual corruption. Hayes and his accomplices were part of a sprawling network that operated with precision, shielding one another at all costs. But Marcus knew that every system had a weak link, and he vowed to find theirs. Night fell, and Emily walked into the study. Her expression was filled with worry, her voice soft but insistent. "Marcus, what's going on? I feel like something's wrong." He looked at her for a long moment, conflicted about how much to reveal. Finally, he took her hand and spoke with quiet determination. "Trust me, Emily. I promise I'll keep our family safe, no matter what it takes." That night, lying in bed, Marcus couldn't sleep. His mind raced with possibilities and plans. The threats against his family had escalated, but instead of deterring him, they only strengthened his resolve. "If they think they can intimidate me, they've chosen the wrong man." The next morning, Marcus was up before dawn. The restless night hadn't dampened his determination. The soft glow of his laptop lit the room as his fingers moved swiftly across the keyboard. He began digging into the records of Officer Travis, the man who had humiliated him just days earlier. The FBI's internal database revealed a long string of complaints against Travis. Each entry was more damning than the last. Excessive use of force, warrantless searches, harassment, and intimidation, especially targeting marginalized groups. Yet, all of these complaints had been dismissed or labeled as insufficient evidence, a shameless tactic to shield him from accountability. One case stood out. 2 years ago, Elijah Daniels, a delivery driver, had been wrongfully arrested by Travis. Elijah had filed a complaint, detailing how he was beaten and verbally abused during his detention. The case had never been investigated, and Elijah had lost his job as a result, plunging his family into financial hardship. Rage bubbled within Marcus as he reviewed the file. But he knew Travis wasn't acting alone. Someone was protecting him, and Marcus was certain he knew who that someone was. Captain Richard Hayes. Without wasting time, Marcus called Rachel. His voice was steady, but the intensity in his tone was unmistakable. Rachel, I've uncovered significant evidence about Travis's abuses, he began. But it's bigger than him. Hayes is behind it all, and I'm certain he's not acting alone. Rachel's response was measured but grave. Marcus, our investigation team just sent in a report. There's a name that keeps appearing in financial transactions and internal communications at Hayes' precinct. They call him the broker. Marcus frowned. The broker? Who is he? No one knows for sure, Rachel replied. But he's the puppet master running a corruption network that extends beyond the police force into local government. Travis and Hayes are just pawns in his game. Rachel sent Marcus additional documents. As he opened the files, the name, the broker, loomed like a specter through the lines of text. He never appeared directly, but his fingerprints were everywhere. Suspicious financial transactions, large sums funneled through shell companies, anonymous donations to political campaigns, and secret payouts to silence complaints. This wasn't just corruption. It was a system engineered to preserve power and enforce silence. Marcus knew the challenge he faced wasn't just about exposing one precinct. It was about dismantling an entire machine built on fear and manipulation. Later that evening, as Marcus worked late into the night, his phone buzzed. The message on the screen was chilling in its simplicity. "Stop, Blake. We know your every move." Attached was a photo of Marcus's house, taken from a distance. Its familiar silhouette now loomed with a menacing aura. This was no longer a warning. It was a declaration of war. Marcus looked up from the files he had been reviewing, his thoughts interrupted by Emily's sudden entrance. Her face was lined with worry, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Marcus, leave it alone," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "You know if we stay, they win. But I can't watch you put yourself in danger like this. What about Ethan and Caleb? Have you thought about what happens if one day they follow through on their threats?" Her words struck a deep chord within him. He stood and approached her, trying to steady his voice despite the turmoil within. "Emily, I understand your fears, but it's for Ethan and Caleb, for their future, that I can't stop. If we don't stand up, who will? This fight is bigger than us." Tears streamed down Emily's face as she looked up at him. "Marcus, you're a hero to me and the boys, but I don't need a hero if it means losing you. Ethan and Caleb need their father. I need my husband." Her voice softened, but her words carried an unshakable firmness. "If you decide to continue, I'll take the kids to my mother's. I won't let them live in the shadow of these threats." Marcus froze, her ultimatum cutting through his resolve like a knife. He took her hands in his voice dropping to a quiet but resolute tone. "Emily, I don't want to lose you or the boys. But I also can't turn my back on those who don't have a voice. I promise to protect you and the kids with everything I have. Please, trust me this time." Emily held his gaze, her expression a mixture of anguish and reluctant understanding. After a long silence, she nodded, though the worry in her eyes didn't fade. "I'll stay, Marcus. But if I see even the smallest sign that we aren't safe, I'll leave with the boys. You need to understand that." He gripped her hands tightly, his tone heavy with determination. "I understand, and I promise, everything will be okay." The next morning, sunlight streamed into their home, a stark contrast to the unease that lingered inside. Marcus sat in the living room surrounded by files, his focus unbroken despite the chaos in his thoughts. Emily entered, her face pale but resolute. "Marcus," she said, her voice trembling, "they broke into our home. What happens next time if you're not here? I can't keep living in fear." Marcus looked up, his expression torn. "Emily, I know how you feel, but if I stop now, they win. They'll keep hurting families who have no one to stand up for them." Tears slipped down her cheeks as she clenched her fists. "I don't care about anyone else right now. I care about this family. Ethan and Caleb need you alive. I can't lose you, Marcus." He stood and placed his hands on her shoulders, his eyes steady. "I will protect you and the kids, no matter what. But I can't walk away from this fight. It's not just for me. It's for our future and the future of everyone in this city." Emily didn't respond immediately, her chest rising and falling as she struggled to suppress her tears. Finally, she nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then make sure you don't lose yourself in this fight." That afternoon, Marcus contacted Rachel, recounting the break-in and handing over the abandoned phone to the FBI's technical team for analysis. "They've gotten too close," Marcus said, his voice edged with urgency. "I need to know who orchestrated this and whether there's a direct link to Hayes or the broker." Rachel agreed to increase security measures. A surveillance team was dispatched to Marcus's home, but both of them knew it was only a temporary measure. "Marcus," Rachel warned, her voice somber over the phone, "you're taking on a system that won't hesitate to act. They won't just threaten, they'll escalate." "Then they've made a mistake," Marcus replied, his voice cold and unyielding. "They think they can intimidate me into backing off, but they've underestimated me." That evening, Marcus sat in his study, the dim glow of the desk lamp illuminating the scattered files before him. The silence of the house was thick, broken only by the occasional rustling of papers. He knew the threats would only intensify, but instead of breaking his resolve, they stoked the fire within him. Suddenly, the shrill ring of his phone pierced the quiet. Marcus reached for it cautiously, his instincts on high alert. The voice on the other end was low and hesitant. "Agent Blake, this is Jake Walters. I'm an officer at the precinct. I need to meet you immediately. I have important information." Marcus's eyes narrowed, suspicion evident in his tone. "Jake Walters? Why should I trust you?" "Because I know who you are," Jake replied, his voice earnest. "I heard you speak about justice at a seminar 2 years ago. Your words inspired me to join this profession, but I can't change the system alone. I need your help." Marcus paused, weighing Jake's words carefully. Finally, he agreed to meet him at a small cafe on the outskirts of town. It was a quiet, unassuming location, ideal for a conversation that needed to remain private. When Jake arrived, Marcus noted the tension etched across the young officer's face. Despite wearing his uniform, Jake looked like a man carrying a heavy burden. He scanned the cafe before spotting Marcus seated in a secluded corner. Without preamble, Marcus cut straight to the point. "What do you have for me?" Jake said nothing at first, instead pulling a small USB drive from his pocket. His expression was grim. "This contains footage from a security camera," he said. "It captures a meeting between Captain Hayes and a man they call the broker. The broker gives Hayes orders to cover up cases, including yours." Hearing the name, Marcus felt a surge of adrenaline. "How did you get this?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Jake nodded solemnly. "It's from the security camera in the conference room. Hayes thought he erased the data, but I managed to copy it before the system was wiped." As Jake left the cafe, Marcus watched his retreating figure, his mind swirling with both gratitude and suspicion. Jake's courage had delivered the breakthrough they needed, but the risks were mounting. The powerful forces they were up against would not sit idly by. Marcus knew the stakes had risen, and from this moment on, none of them could afford a single misstep. That night, Marcus sat in his study, the USB drive still in his hand. The flickering light from his desk lamp cast sharp shadows across the files and papers strewn before him. His eyes burned, not from exhaustion, but from the relentless determination coursing through him. They might have built a powerful network of corruption, but now, for the first time, they were up against someone who wouldn't stop until the entire truth was dragged into the light. The video from Jake was a major turning point. It not only provided undeniable evidence linking Captain Hayes to the broker, but also opened a window into a labyrinth of corruption. Days of relentless analysis unearthed encrypted transactions, shadowy intermediaries, and connections to a man whose name was as venomous as his actions: Jonathan Hale. On the surface, Hale was a philanthropist and a paragon of success, often hailed as a hero in news articles that celebrated his generous donations and charity galas. But beneath the polished exterior was a man whose ambition had been fueled by pain and resentment. Born into poverty and injustice, Hale had witnessed his family's descent into despair after his father was unjustly fired from a large corporation. Those memories had scarred him deeply, and while his early ambitions were to change the system with integrity, the unyielding barriers of corruption pushed him down a darker path. "If I can't fight the system," Hale had once said in a secret meeting, "Then I'll control it." What followed was a decades-long scheme to build a criminal empire hidden behind a veneer of respectability. Through shell companies, anonymous accounts, and bribes funneled through charitable fronts, Hale orchestrated a corruption network that reached into politics, law enforcement, and beyond. His name never appeared directly on any documents, but his fingerprints were unmistakable. Rachel, scrolling through financial records, remarked, "He's a ghost, hiding in plain sight." Most of the money is funneled through intermediaries before it even reaches his associates like Hayes. Marcus stared at the screen, his voice cold. "He hides well, but this time, we've found him." The team began tracking Hale's movements, uncovering his frequent visits to a heavily secured penthouse in the heart of the city. The luxurious building, perched atop a skyline of glass and steel, stood as both his fortress and his Achilles heel. "This is where we'll start," Marcus said, pointing to the detailed map displayed on the screen. "He can't have time to erase evidence or escape. We need a flawless plan." Rachel nodded, her expression serious. "I've requested search and arrest warrants, but Marcus, Hale has powerful connections. The moment we act, he'll mobilize everything he has." "We'll do this by the book," Marcus replied, his voice like steel. "But I won't let him slip away." That evening, Marcus returned home. The warm glow of the living room lights greeted him, but the atmosphere was heavy with unspoken fears. Emily was waiting, her expression a mix of worry and determination. She sat beside him on the couch, her hands gripping his tightly. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Hale is dangerous. He's already shown he can come after us." Marcus met her gaze, his voice resolute. "He's not just threatening us, Emily. He's threatening everyone else too. I can't let him continue destroying lives." Emily tightened her grip on his hands, her eyes welling with tears. "I believe in you, Marcus. But promise me, you'll come back." He pulled her into a close embrace, his voice steady. "I promise." The following night, the FBI team gathered at a staging area near Hale's penthouse. Agents double-checked their equipment and weapons, their faces tense but focused. Rachel approached Marcus, her expression grim. "Hale is smart," she said. "He won't go down without a fight. We have to be ready for anything." Marcus nodded, his eyes unflinching. "He might be smart, but he's not invincible." As they moved toward the building, the air was thick with tension. The darkness of the city seemed to press in around them, but the flashing lights of FBI vehicles and the quiet hum of their gear illuminated their path. Marcus, leading the team, took a deep breath, the adrenaline surging through his veins. "This is it," he murmured to himself. "We're going to bring him into the light." The team reached the penthouse door, their steps silent as shadows. With a signal from Marcus, the door burst open, and the team swept inside. The opulence of the apartment stood in stark contrast to the tension in the air. Marcus's sharp eyes scanned the room, landing on Jonathan Hale seated in a sleek armchair, calmly sipping a glass of wine. "Jonathan Hale," Marcus declared, his gun trained on the man. "You're under arrest for operating a criminal and corruption network." Hale didn't flinch. He set the glass down slowly and raised his hands. "I'll go with you," he said, his voice calm, almost mocking. "But I warn you, arresting me won't change anything. The system is bigger than you think, Agent Blake." Marcus felt a chill at Hale's words but didn't waver. "Let the system decide that," he replied coldly. As Hale was led away in handcuffs, Rachel discovered a concealed safe behind a painting. Inside, they found a trove of documents and hard drives, evidence that could unravel Hale's entire operation. Rachel's eyes gleamed with determination as she held up the files. "This is exactly what we need." At FBI headquarters, Hale sat in the interrogation room, his composed demeanor unbroken. He leaned back in his chair, his cold eyes locked on Marcus and Rachel as they entered. Marcus placed the seized documents on the table, his voice low and commanding. "We have all the evidence of your operations. This is your one chance to tell the truth." Hale smirked, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Do you think arresting me ends this? This system isn't just me, it's an empire." Marcus watched Jake leave the cafe, his figure disappearing into the dark night. Despite the betrayal, Marcus couldn't ignore the weight of Jake's actions, both good and bad. Jake had risked everything to expose the truth, even if he had been coerced into his earlier decisions. But now, the battle wasn't just against Jonathan Hale and his criminal empire. It was about ensuring that every innocent person, every voice silenced by corruption, was finally heard. That night, Marcus sat at his desk, the USB drive from Jake still clutched in his hand. The documents and files laid out before him painted a harrowing picture of Hale's network. An empire so deeply rooted that its tendrils reached into politics, businesses, and law enforcement. Marcus knew dismantling it would be like taking on a hydra. Cutting one head would only reveal another. But he was prepared. The trial of Jonathan Hale began with the weight of the entire system bearing down on it. The courtroom buzzed with tension, a heavy silence falling as the judge's gavel struck, signaling the start. Hale entered the courtroom with the same smug arrogance that had defined his persona throughout his criminal career. But Marcus, seated among the witnesses, noted the slight stiffness in Hale's stride and the nervous glance he cast at his lawyers. Karen Price, the prosecutor, stood to deliver her opening statement. "Today, we are not just trying Jonathan Hale," she declared, her voice resonating with conviction. "We are confronting a system of corruption that has harmed countless innocent lives. The evidence will show that the defendant is not the philanthropist he claims to be, but the orchestrator of a vast criminal network." When Marcus took the stand, the room fell silent. His calm, authoritative presence carried weight. He recounted everything, from the moment he was falsely detained to the threats against his family and the subsequent investigation. As Marcus spoke, the evidence was presented. The damning video from Jake, financial records, testimonies, and the discovery of manipulated documents. Each revelation landed like a thunderclap, shattering Hale's carefully constructed image. But Hale was not without his defenses. When it was his turn to speak, he began with a mocking tone. "This is nothing but a witch hunt," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "I've been targeted for my success, and these so-called pieces of evidence are nothing but fabrications." He then pointed fingers at others within his network, attempting to paint himself as a victim of a larger conspiracy. Hale's lawyers produced falsified alibis, including forged receipts and testimonies from witnesses claiming Hale was elsewhere during critical events. The jury began to waver, their confidence shaken by Hale's manipulative tactics. Rachel leaned toward Marcus, whispering urgently, "We need to act fast, or he'll walk free." Marcus nodded and rose again, addressing the court with a calm yet commanding tone. "Your Honor, I have additional evidence that directly contradicts Mr. Hale's claims." He presented surveillance footage from the charity event Hale claimed to have attended. Upon closer analysis, it was clear that the person in the video was a body double. Marcus also revealed financial records showing payments made to the witnesses within the last 24 hours, bribes orchestrated by Hale. The courtroom erupted in murmurs as the tide turned once again. The jury deliberated for hours before returning with a verdict, guilty on all charges. Hale's empire had begun to crumble. Yet even as the verdict was read, a commotion erupted outside the courtroom. A group of protesters, organized by Hale's remaining allies, disrupted the proceedings. They shouted slogans, claiming Hale was the victim of a political conspiracy. The chaos was meant to buy time, possibly for Hale to escape or destroy remaining evidence. Marcus stood and addressed the court, his voice cutting through the noise. "Your Honor, this disruption is proof of the lengths Hale and his network will go to undermine justice. We cannot allow their tactics to cloud the truth." Order was restored, and the judge dismissed any motions for delays. The trial proceeded, and Hale was sentenced to life imprisonment. As he was led away in handcuffs, his smug grin finally replaced by a defeated scowl, Marcus felt a sense of closure, though he knew the fight was far from over. In the weeks following the trial, sweeping reforms were enacted. Officers implicated in corruption were dismissed or prosecuted. Community trust in law enforcement, though fragile, began to rebuild. Marcus became a symbol of resilience and justice, though he shied away from the spotlight, focusing instead on his family. One evening, Marcus sat on the porch of his home, watching Ethan and Caleb play in the yard. Emily joined him, resting her head on his shoulder. "What do you think the future holds?" she asked softly. Marcus gazed at the horizon, the golden hues of the setting sun casting a warm glow over the city. "The future is something we have to fight to create," he said, his voice resolute. "Not just for us, but for everyone." Together, they watched their boys play, their laughter ringing out, a sound of hope and renewal. Though the battle against corruption wasn't over, Marcus knew they had taken a critical step forward. And as long as he drew breath, he would continue to fight for justice and a brighter future. Do you believe individuals like Marcus can make a lasting difference in dismantling systemic corruption? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories like this. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.